I'm Samantha Harlow, 31 years old, and a structural engineer. My hands were covered in mud when my phone rang. I was helping my grandmother Vivian carefully plant award-winning orchids in pots in the greenhouse. Before Alzheimer's disease began to chip away at her memory, she had run an art gallery for nearly 40 years. I glanced at the message. It was from my mother, Patricia. We're starting a new life in the Dominican Republic. Everything has been transferred. Vivian will be fine with you. Don't worry about anything. I looked at Vivian. She was staring at a delicate white flower with an uncertain smile, murmuring to herself, completely unaware that everything was about to fall apart. I approached her and whispered, "It was good that I transferred those $178,000 yesterday. If you're listening to this and you're the only responsible person in your family, then you need to hear what happened next. You need to understand Silverstone Estate and Gallery. It's not just a property. It's my grandmother's life's work. It's vast, culturally significant, and quietly decaying. My younger brother James is an artistic soul who's dedicated everything to saving it, transforming the old car garage into a contemporary art space, organizing exhibitions, managing artist residencies. He oversees the curatorial vision, creative decisions, and thousands of complex details that make Silverstone important to the art community. I manage the finances. The structural engineer who manages properties as a side job. I'm the practical one. The one who knows the foundation is dangerously collapsing, the roof needs a $55,000 repair, and we barely cover operating costs each month. The only thing keeping us afloat is the family trust fund. My grandmother Vivian established this fund with $265,000 when she retired. The rules were very clear. The money served two specific purposes. First, to preserve Silverstone as a cultural icon. Second, to cover her increasing medical expenses. Her Alzheimer's disease is progressing steadily. Some days she is sharp and witty, recounting the gallery's history with perfect clarity. Other days she gets lost in the East Corridor, disoriented, frightened, searching for people who died decades ago. This fund is her safety net. Is our safety net. Then there's my mom and dad, Michael and Patricia. To everyone, they're charming, spontaneous, inspiring people. They are the life of every party, constantly discussing their next big adventure, their next passionate project. But to James and me, they are simply irresponsible. They never saw Silverstone as a family home, but as a personal investment account. They began to see their own mother, Vivian, not as a family member but as an obligation they had to escape. "We did our duty," my father Michael said to me last month as he lay on the garden terrace. "We should be enjoying our retirement, not running the museum." I am the only one who sees the bank statements. As joint executor, I have full access to the account, and for the past 7 months I have been watching the money systematically disappear. At first, small amounts were being withdrawn. My father claimed it was for gallery operating expenses, while my mother claimed it was for Vivian's specialist doctor appointments. But the numbers didn't add up. The gallery's expenses were covered by the operating accounts. The appointments matched the spa expenses at luxury resorts in the Caribbean. It was as if they had been planning this operation for years, systematically draining the trust's funds. One evening after James closed the gallery, I tried to talk to him about it. He was exhausted, still wearing his curator's gloves, his clothes covered in paint dust from setting up the exhibition. "Sam, please," he sighed and slumped into a stool. "I can't deal with another family feud. They're just being themselves. Realistically, what can we do? That's the problem, isn't it? Because direct confrontation seems impossible, we ignore their dysfunction." But I looked at the spreadsheets. I carefully calculated the trajectory. At the current rate of spending, Vivian's grandmother's entire future, her medical care, her safety net, and Silverstone itself, would be completely depleted. Within 6 months, this was no longer irresponsibility. This was calculated theft. The real tension began about 4 months ago. When I walked into my father's study, I caught him quickly minimizing a browser window. I glanced at the screen, glossy. Photos of beachfront mansions, luxury oceanfront properties, retirement communities, boasting world-class healthcare facilities. The banner read, Dominican Paradise. Living. Just doing some research, he said, a nervous laugh filling the room. Know how excited Mom gets about trips. A week later, Mom started taking calls in the garden shed, her voice turning into urgent whispers. When I approached, she'd immediately hang up and put on an overly bright smile. I'm just organizing a get-together with an old friend, sweetie. Nothing important. Then the excuses multiplied. Vivian and my grandmother forgot the care shifts they had planned. I would find James crying at the gallery, having waited an extra 7 hours for them to arrive. The traffic was terrible, my mother would say, entering without making eye contact. We didn't notice how time flew by. The burden fell entirely on James and me. Dark circles formed under my brother's eyes, and his usual cheerful demeanor had completely turned into a sense of exhaustion. I struggled with this stress for weeks. I was crushed by guilt. That's the real burden of being the emotional anchor of the family, isn't it? You're the one responsible, the one who has to hold everything together. So you feel guilty even for thinking about setting firm boundaries. You feel guilty for defending yourself, standing up to your own. Parents feels like betrayal, like there's something deeply wrong with your character. I was the one responsible for keeping the peace. Yet here I was mentally preparing for a destructive confrontation. Everything changed one night when I found James asleep at the gallery table. His head was on unpaid bills and artist contracts. His face drained of color from exhaustion. I returned to the main house. My grandmother Vivian stood in the hallway holding an old photograph, tears streaming down her face. Have you seen my husband? She whispered. I don't remember where he went. Afraid he's forgotten me. My grandfather had passed away 14 years ago. That moment something became clear. All my guilt evaporated, replaced by a definite and unshakable clarity. I wasn't betraying my family. I was protecting my real family, James and my grandmother Vivian. My family had already made their decision. Now I had to make mine. The next morning I went to the bank. I sat down with account manager Mrs. Rodriguez and explained my intentions. As joint guardian I had legal authority. Didn't need anyone's permission. I opened a new escrow account, Vivian Legacy and Silverstone Preservation Fund. Only James and I had signing authority. Then I initiated the transfer. I transferred $178,000 from the original trust to this new account, leaving $87,000 behind. Enough to make it look like there were still valuable funds remaining. Enough to make them believe they had successfully gotten away with something significant. It was meticulous. I printed every statement, every contribution, every dollar allocation. Hands steady, my resolve absolute, I walked out of that bank. That night, I received the approval I had been waiting for. Standing in the dark hallway after midnight, I heard urgent, intense sounds coming from the kitchen. We deserve this, my mother Patricia said, her voice hardening. We can't spend another year managing his decline. This isn't the life we imagined. What about the children? My father asked in a weak voice. They're adults, Patricia said sarcastically. Sam has his engineering firm. James has his small gallery project. They'll figure it out. The remaining money should be enough for them. I stood motionless in the darkness, my blood running cold. They didn't see their own mother's deteriorating health as their responsibility. I saw her as an obligation to escape. And $87,000 seemed like a reasonable price to pay to abandon her completely. At that moment, I understood something deeper than simple selfishness. Don't know what to call it, but they thought the world revolved only around them. They didn't care what happened to others. They were the protagonists of their own movie. Everyone else, including their own mother and adult children, were just supporting characters in their story. When the characters became annoying or demanded too much attention, it was enough to remove them from the script. The next 72 hours passed in a blur, in calculated silence. I didn't mention the money transferred to James. I didn't confront my family directly. I just waited, knowing exactly what would happen. 'Cause I had seen the emails. I had access to their shared cloud accounts. Years ago they had given me their passwords for emergencies. The villa in the Dominican Republic had been paid for. The deposit had been made. The moving company was scheduled for the following week. My family wasn't just leaving. They had made an incredible plan, as if they had been waiting for this moment for months, thinking through every last detail. Wednesday morning arrived, and everything blew up exactly as I had predicted. My mother, Patricia, burst into my office at work, her voice sharp and breathless on the phone. "Samantha, there's a problem with the trust account. The bank says we can't access the money. They claim some kind of restriction has been placed on it." I was expecting this call. After a full 5 seconds of silence, I replied, "It's okay, Mom. I imposed the restriction." A sharp intake of breath was heard on the other end of the phone. Then nothing. Pure stunned silence. "What did you do?" Her voice had changed. It was no longer commanding. She was scared. "I'm the co-guardian," I said calmly, choosing each word carefully and deliberately. "Have full legal authority." I reviewed the account statements. I saw everything. 7 months of transfers. Expenses for the Caribbean resort. The purchase of a luxury villa in the Dominican Republic. Airline tickets. All paid directly from Vivian's grandmother's medical trust account. "Samantha, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly," I cut her off. "You and my father are systematically depleting a trust account specifically created for my grandmother's care and the preservation of Silverstone. This is a breach of fiduciary duty. This is financial elder abuse. And I have documentation for every transaction." The line went silent again. I could hear her breathing, now sharp and panicked. "You're being unreasonable," he finally said, his voice taking on that dangerous sweetness he used when manipulation failed. "We deserve our retirement. We sacrificed too much for your generation. You deserve to retire," I said. "But not with my grandmother's money. You can take your own savings. You can work longer. You can move to a smaller house. But you can't steal money from a woman with Alzheimer's. That's not how it is." "It absolutely is," I cut him off. "And if you continue to access that money, I will file an official complaint with the state's elder abuse hotline. I have the documents. I have timeline. I have everything." The phone hung up. She had hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time, my hands trembling despite my calm appearance. Had just declared war on my family. There was no turning back. By evening the house was in chaos. My father Michael came home early, his face flushed with anger. He stormed into the main house looking for me, his voice echoing down the hallways. "What the hell did you do?" he yelled when he found me in the library where I was, pretending to read a book. "The bank said they froze our access to the funds. Do you realize what you've done?" "I know exactly what I did," I said quietly, without looking up from my book. "I saved the funds. Those were our retirement funds," he shouted. "We earned them." "No," I said, finally looking him in the eye. "They were Vivian's grandmother's funds." Funds she earned over decades building Silverstone. Funds she specifically set aside for her own care and the preservation of the gallery. And you were stealing them. We're her children, he said, his voice trembling with anger. We have every right. To what? Asked coldly. To abandon her. To leave her medical care to James and me and retire to the Caribbean. That's not family. You're ruining our future, said my mother Patricia, entering the room behind him. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Do you understand? We sold our house. We made preparations. We were leaving next week. Then you'll have to make new preparations, I said. With your own money. This is betrayal, my father said, his voice low and dangerous. Is this what you do to the family that gave you everything? And there it was. The guilt. The emotional manipulation. Framing their theft as sacrifice. You're right, I said quietly. This is betrayal. But I'm not the one doing it. James found me in the greenhouse 3 hours later, after my family had retreated to their bedrooms, leaving the house in a suffocating silence. My brother's face was pale, his mind confused. Sam, what happened? He asked. Mom called me crying. Dad keeps talking about lawyers. What's going on? I took a breath and told him everything. The transferred money. The new protection. Count. The documents I'd gathered. The decision I'd made unilaterally without consulting him. I expected anger. I expected to be blamed for making this decision without him. But James walked toward me and wrapped his arms around me. He was crying. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for protecting him. Thank you for protecting us. The next morning my family held a family meeting. They had gathered again. Devised a strategy. They had decided to resort to emotional pressure once more. We understand you're upset, my mother began, carefully adjusting her voice to an almost reasonable tone. And we respect your desire to protect your grandmother. But this situation is affecting us greatly. We want you to reconsider your decision. I won't reconsider my decision, I said firmly. We are your parents, my father added. Of course there is a way to compromise. Here. There is no compromise, I said. Vivian's money is her money. If you want to retire in the Dominican Republic, use your own money. If you can't retire, keep working. But this conversation is over. So you're choosing her over us? My mother asked, her voice trembling. After everything we've done for you. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone, I said. I'm drawing a line. And that line is this. You will not steal from a defenseless old woman. If that makes me the villain in your story, I accept that role. The reality of their situation was slowly sinking in. The villa deposit was non-refundable. The shipping company had been paid in advance. Alternative flights to the Dominican Republic couldn't be cancelled without huge penalties. They had made irreversible decisions, thinking they could access money they could no longer reach. They had backed themselves into a corner, and the only card that could help them escape this situation was in my hands, and I had no intention of giving them that card. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure campaign intensified. My mother stopped eating. My father hired a lawyer to investigate whether there was any legal basis to challenge my guardianship. My mother's sister called me and asked me to reconsider my decision. Our family friends also reached out. You're being too harsh, they said. Family should support each other, they insisted. Your family is falling apart. But every time I felt that familiar guilt pulling me down, I would go into the greenhouse and see Vivian tending to my grandmother's orchids, safe and cared for. I would go to Silverstone and see James finally shaking off his fatigue and working with enthusiasm again. I would look at the protected funds and know they were there for their intended purpose. My family eventually found a compromise solution. They scaled back their retirement plans. They sold some properties they had forgotten they owned. They took out a modest loan, putting up their own home as collateral. They didn't get the fabulous Caribbean getaway they had dreamed of, but they made it work. They moved to a smaller community in Florida. They visit occasionally. They're polite, but something fundamental between us has changed. My father never fully forgave me. My mother has reached the stage of acceptance. They don't understand why I chose financial responsibility over family comfort. They don't understand why I considered protecting Vivian more important than protecting their unconditional love. But they don't understand this. I never had a choice. Because the moment I lay awake at midnight listening to my parents discuss abandoning my mother for a luxury villa, I became a new person. I became someone who could no longer tolerate injustice disguised as freedom. I was willing to be the ungrateful child because sometimes doing what's right means hurting those you love most. And standing firm on that line, even if I had to do it alone, became the most liberating thing I ever did in my life. Samantha Harlow and James weren't chasing attention. They chose something steadier, a life built on truth, and the quiet courage to draw a line and keep Vivian's legacy safe. Thank you for walking with them. This isn't about perfection. It's about doing what's right when it costs you comfort. If you've ever felt overlooked or called too much for setting boundaries, remember, your worth isn't what you save, but who you refuse to lose. If their story moved you, hit the hype button and subscribe to Betrayal's Bite. Until next time, stay brave, stay steady, and trust that standing your ground can change everything.